Ever wonder what it feels like to be invisible one moment and unstoppable the next? Not in some poetic, chasing your dreams kind of way, but raw, real, like you're cruising through life, minding your own business, only to have someone try to flip your world upside down without a clue who they're messing with. That's where Elena Morgan found herself tonight, behind the wheel of her sleek black sedan, the city's golden streetlights painting streaks across her windshield. She wasn't just anybody, she was the FBI chief, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make it hold its breath. But right now, she was just a driver, savoring the quiet hum of the road after a long day. The evening was soft, almost too perfect, the kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting to crack. Elena had just left a high-stakes security briefing at a government facility, one of those meetings where every word carried weight and every decision could shift the balance of things most people never see. She didn't have a driver, no armored SUV trailing her. She preferred it that way. Years in law enforcement had taught her to treasure these moments alone, the open road a rare chance to exhale, to let the weight of her badge slip away for a few miles. Dressed in a sharp blazer and slacks, nothing flashy, her credentials tucked safely in her bag, she was headed home, the city's pulse fading into the background. This wasn't her first rodeo. Elena had climbed the ranks through grit and nerve, seen every shade of chaos the job could throw at her. She knew the streets, the systems, the silent rules that governed who got respect and who got questioned. Maybe that's why, when she glanced in her rearview mirror and saw red and blue lights flashing, her stomach didn't drop. It tightened, like a coil ready to spring. A police car right on her tail, its siren cutting through the night like a warning she hadn't asked for. She sighed, a slow release of air that carried more annoyance than fear, and eased her car to the shoulder, the gravel crunching under her tires. What the hell was this about? She hadn't sped, hadn't swerved, hadn't given anyone a reason to care. Her hands rested on the wheel, steady, visible, a habit carved from years of knowing how fast things could spiral. The lights kept flashing, bright enough to make her squint, and in that moment, the solitude she'd craved felt like a trap. Elena wasn't naive. She'd heard the stories, lived some of them, and the weight of her badge didn't always shield her from the world's sharper edges. As the officer's silhouette emerged from the squad car, adjusting his belt like he was prepping for a fight, she felt the air shift, the night turning sharper, heavier. Whatever was coming, she was ready. But ready didn't mean happy. Elena sat still, hands steady on the wheel, the red and blue lights pulsing in her rear view, like a heartbeat she didn't ask for. The city's golden glow felt miles away now, swallowed by the glare of the squad car behind her. She'd pulled over clean, no fuss, but the coil in her gut was tightening, not from fear. Elena Morgan didn't do fear, but from the bone-deep knowledge of how these moments could twist. She'd been in law enforcement longer than most cops had been shaving, seen every angle of power and prejudice play out. This wasn't her first dance with a badge on the wrong side of right, and it wouldn't be her last. Still, it stung. The officer's boots crunched on the gravel, slow, deliberate, like he was savoring the approach. Elena caught his silhouette in her side mirror, tall, broad, adjusting his belt like he was auditioning for a tough guy flick. Her jaw tightened, but her face stayed smooth, unreadable. The kind of calm that came from years of staring down worse than this. She rolled down her window as he reached the car, the cool night air slipping in, sharp against her skin. The officer leaned in close, too close, his shadow blocking the streetlight, his eyes scanning her like she was a puzzle he'd already decided he didn't like. "Good evening, officer," Elena said, her voice low, firm, threaded with just enough courtesy to keep things civil. "Is there a problem?" She kept her hands visible, palms open on the wheel, a reflex born from training in truth. You didn't give them reasons, not when the air felt this heavy. The officer, his name tag read Harrington, didn't answer right away. He stood there, chewing the silence, his gaze flicking over her blazer, her car, her face, like he was cataloging reasons to be suspicious. "License and registration," he said finally, his tone clipped, hard like she'd already crossed a line just by existing. No explanation, no "good evening" back, just a demand, barked with the kind of edge that said he wasn't here to chat. Elena raised an eyebrow. Slow, deliberate, letting him see she wasn't rattled. May I ask why I'm being pulled over? Her words were measured, each one a step on a tightrope. She wasn't challenging him, not yet, but she wasn't rolling over either. She'd dealt with guys like this before, the ones who thought a badge gave them a free pass to play king. If he had a reason, she wanted to hear it. If he didn't, she'd know exactly what this was. Harrington's lips twitched, not quite a smirk, but close, the kind of look that said he wasn't used to being questioned. License and registration, he repeated slower this time, leaning in until his breath fogged the edge of her window. His hand rested on his belt, fingers brushing the holster. Not a threat outright, but a message all the same. Now! Elena held his gaze, her pulse steady, her mind racing through the math of the moment. She knew the playbook. Comply, de-escalate, keep it cool. But she also knew the cost of staying quiet, the way silence could let assumptions fester. This wasn't about a taillight or a speed trap. She'd driven this route 100 times, clean as a whistle. No, this was something else, something older, uglier, and the way Harrington's eyes narrowed, like he'd already written her story, told her all she needed to know. Still, she didn't move for her bag. Not yet. Let him dig his hole a little deeper. Officer, she said, her voice still calm but sharper now, like a blade sliding free. Unless you've got a valid reason for stopping me, I'd like to know what this is about. That's my right. She didn't blink, didn't shift, just let the words sit there, heavy, waiting to see if he'd double down or back off. Harrington's jaw tightened, his fingers flexing near that holster, and for a split second, the night felt like it could tip either way. The city was quiet around them, the streetlights casting long, jagged shadows. But in that car, it was just Elena and a man who thought he held all the cards. He didn't know it yet, but he was playing against a queen, and she was about to change the game. The night hung heavy around Elena's car, the red and blue lights slicing through the dark like a warning she couldn't ignore. Officer Harrington loomed at her window, his hand still grazing that holster. His eyes locked on her with a mix of suspicion and something uglier, something that made her skin prickle. Elena's question, "Why am I being pulled over?" still hung unanswered, and the silence was a blade, sharp and ready to cut. She kept her hands on the wheel, steady as stone, but inside her mind was a chessboard, calculating every move. Harrington thought he was running the show, but he was about to learn how fast the script could flip. He leaned in closer, his breath clouding the window's edge, his voice dropping to a growl. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," he said, the words clipped, like he'd rehearsed them in a mirror. His gaze flicked over her again, her blazer, her posture, the sleek interior of her sedan, like he was hunting for evidence to match his hunch. Elena's brow lifted, slow, deliberate, her calm a shield he couldn't dent. "And what description would that be?" she asked, her tone even but pointed, each word a jab he wasn't expecting. She'd heard lines like this before, vague, slippery excuses that crumbled under scrutiny. If he had a real suspect, he'd have details. Height, build, something concrete. But his eyes told her what his mouth wouldn't. This wasn't about a description. It was about her, here, in a car, too nice for his assumptions. Harrington's smirk twitched, like her question was a personal insult. He straightened, his hand still near that damn holster, and his voice turned colder. "Step out of the vehicle." It wasn't a request, it was an order, barked with the kind of authority that expected obedience. His stance shifted, legs braced, like he was ready for her to bolt or fight. Elena didn't move, not a muscle. Her eyes held his, unblinking, and the air between them crackled, tight as a wire. She knew the math of this moment. Comply too fast. And you're admitting guilt. Push too hard and things spiral. Years in the FBI had taught her how to walk that line, but years as a black woman had taught her something else. Moments like this weren't accidents. They were tests, and Harrington was failing hers. "Officer," she said, her voice low, deliberate, "unless you've got a valid reason for stopping me, I'd like to know why you're asking me to exit my car. That's not optional. It's the law." His face hardened, a flash of anger cracking through that smirk. "I said step out," he snapped, his hand inching closer to the holster now, fingers flexing like he was itching to escalate. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The threat was clear, hanging there like smoke, and for a split second, the street felt too quiet, too empty, like the world was holding its breath. Elena's jaw clenched, a slow burn of frustration rising, but she kept it locked down. She knew how this could go, knew the stories, the videos, the names that lingered like ghosts. She wasn't naive. Her badge didn't make her bulletproof, but she also wasn't powerless, not by a long shot. With a measured nod, she reached for her bag, slow, deliberate, letting him see every move, and stepped out, her boots hitting the pavement with a soft thud. The night air was cool, sharp, but it did nothing to ease the heat building inside her. Harrington didn't waste time. He grabbed her arm, his grip too tight, his fingers digging in like he thought she'd vanish if he let go. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he demanded, his voice loud now, almost a shout, like he was performing for an audience that wasn't there. He pulled her closer to the squad car, away from her sedan, his eyes scanning her like she was a suspect he'd already convicted. Elena stopped short, planting her feet, her arm rigid under his grip. She stared at him, her gaze a wall he couldn't climb. "I work in this city, officer," she said, her voice steel wrapped in calm. "I was on my way home." Each word was deliberate, a line in the sand, but she could feel the anger simmering, not at him, she'd dealt with worse, but at the script he was reading from, the one that said she didn't belong. Harrington scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Yeah? Doing what?" He looked her up and down, his smirk creeping back, bolder now. "You don't look like you belong in this area." The words landed like a slap, raw and unfiltered, stripping away any pretense. It wasn't about a description, a suspect, or even her car. It was about her skin, her presence, the audacity of being here at all. Elna took a deep breath, slow, steady, the kind you take before you decide how much hell to raise. Her badge was in her bag, inches away, but she held off, letting him dig deeper, letting the moment stretch. "Officer," she said, her voice dropping colder, sharper, "I suggest you take a moment to think about what you're doing." It wasn't a plea. It was a warning, quiet but heavy, like the click of a safety coming off. Harrington laughed, a short, dismissive bark, but his grip tightened, and she knew he wasn't listening. Not yet, but he would. Elena stood firm on the pavement, the night air sharp against her skin, Harrington's grip still biting into her arm like he thought he could anchor his authority there. His words, "You don't look like you belong," hung in the air, raw and ugly, a confession he didn't even realize he'd made. The street was quiet, the city's hum drowned out by the pulse of red and blue lights, but inside Elena, a fire was smoldering, not wild but focused, the kind that burned clean and left nothing behind. She'd given him a chance to back off, a warning to rethink his game, but Harrington's laugh, short, smug, like she was a joke, told her he'd chosen wrong. Time to rewrite the ending. Her eyes locked onto his, steady, unyielding, like a storm gathering strength. "Oh yeah," she said, echoing his taunt, her voice low, almost a whisper, but heavy with something dangerous. "And why's that, officer?" She didn't move, didn't pull away from his grip, just let the question sit there, sharp as a blade, daring him to dig deeper. His smirk flickered, just for a second, like he sensed the ground shifting, but couldn't see the cliff. Harrington leaned in, his face close enough that she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You heard me," he said, doubling down, his voice louder now, like he needed to convince himself. "Just answer the question. What are you doing here?" His fingers tightened, a silent threat, but his eyes darted, betraying a crack in his armor. He was fishing, grasping for control, and Elena saw it clear as day. This wasn't about a suspect or a description. It was about her, her skin, her car, her existence in a space he'd decided she didn't fit. She exhaled slow, deliberate, letting the moment stretch, letting him think he'd won. Her bag hung from her shoulder, the weight of her badge inside it like a loaded gun she hadn't drawn yet. She could have ended this already, flashed her credentials, shut him down, but there was power in waiting, in letting him bury himself. Every word, every move he made was another nail in his coffin, and Elena was patient. She'd built a career on moments like this, turning tables when the odds looked stacked. "All right," she said, her voice calm, almost too calm, like the hush before thunder. Without breaking eye contact, she reached into her bag, slow, deliberate, her movements telegraphed so he wouldn't flinch. Harrington's grip loosened just a fraction, his brow creasing, like he wasn't sure what she was pulling. Her fingers closed around the badge holder, cool leather against her palm, and she drew it out with the grace of someone who knew the weight of what came next. She flipped it open, the FBI seal catching the squad car's lights, bold and unmistakable. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Chief of Operations, Elena Morgan. Harrington's smirk vanished like someone had yanked it off his face. His eyes darted to the badge, then back to her, wide and wild, like he'd just stepped on a live wire. His hand fell from her arm, limp, and he took a half step back, his boots scraping the pavement. "You're the..." His voice cracked, barely a whisper, all that bravado draining out like water from a busted pipe. His face went pale, the kind of pale that comes when your whole world flips upside down. "Yes," Elena said, her voice cool, precise, each word a hammer strike. "I run the FBI, and you just illegally detained me without cause, used excessive force, and profiled me for no reason other than the color of my skin." She stepped forward, closing the gap he'd tried to make, her badge still open, its weight heavier than any gun. "Care to explain that, Officer Harrington?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out, just a choke sound, like his brain was short-circuiting. His hands twitched, one hovering near his belt, the other half raised like he wanted to wave the whole thing away. But there was no undoing this. Elena's stare didn't waver, her presence filling the space like a storm cloud. And for the first time, Harrington looked small, like a kid caught breaking something he couldn't fix. The lights kept flashing, the night kept breathing, but in that moment, it was just Elena and a man who'd bet on the wrong hand. She snapped the badge shut, the sound sharp enough to make him flinch, and slipped it back into her bag. Slow, deliberate, letting him stew in the silence. She could have called it there, driven off, let him sweat it out alone. But this wasn't just about tonight. This was about every time someone like her had faced a badge and a smirk. Every assumption that went unchecked. Harrington wasn't just a bad cop. He was a symptom, and Elena wasn't here to treat symptoms. She was here to cut out the disease. Elena stood tall on the empty street, the squad car's lights painting her shadow long and unyielding across the pavement. Her badge was back in her bag, but its weight lingered, heavy as truth, and Officer Harrington was still reeling, his face pale, his hands trembling like he'd just touched a live wire. Her words, illegal detention, excessive force, profiling, hung in the air, a verdict he couldn't dodge. He stammered, mouth flapping like a fish out of water, but no excuse could claw him out of this hole. Elena didn't move, didn't soften her stare. She'd given him enough rope, and he'd knotted it tight around his own neck. The silence shattered with the low growl of another engine, a second patrol car pulling up, its lights joining the red and blue chaos. Doors slammed and two officers stepped out, their boots heavy on the gravel. The taller one, a woman with a sergeant's stripes and a no-nonsense stride, scanned the scene. Harrington's frozen panic, Elena's calm authority, and her eyes narrowed. She approached fast, her partner trailing, a younger guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "What's going on here?" the sergeant demanded, her voice sharp but cautious, like she sensed the air was charged. Harrington turned, relief flickering across his face, like he thought backup meant salvation. "Sarge, I was just..." he started, but Elena cut him off, her voice smooth, lethal, like a blade sliding free. "You were just illegally detaining me," she said, stepping forward, her presence filling the space. "Gripping my arm, profiling me, telling me I don't belong. all without cause. She tilted her head, her eyes locked on Harrington, then flicked to the sergeant. I'm Elena Morgan, FBI Chief of Operations. Your officer here decided to make some bad calls tonight. The sergeant's face froze, her gaze snapping to Elena, then to the badge Elena held up again, its seal glinting like a warning. Chief Morgan? She said, her voice low, almost a whisper, like she was piecing together a puzzle she wished wasn't real. Her eyes darted to Harrington, and the shift was instant, relief to rage. You pulled over the FBI chief? The words were a hiss, each one a nail in Harrington's coffin. Harrington's knees buckled, his hands raised like he could ward off the truth. I didn't know, he blurted, his voice cracking, desperate. I thought she fit a description, I swear. But the lie sounded hollow now, crumbling under the weight of Elena's stare and the sergeant's glare. That's the problem, Elena said, her tone cold, precise, cutting through his panic like glass. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You saw a black woman in a nice car and decided I was out of place. That's not a description. That's a bias. She crossed her arms, her posture unshakable. Every word a step toward justice. I want to know if this is how your department operates, or if Harrington's just a special case. The sergeant, her name tag read Ramirez, clenched her jaw, her face a storm of anger and embarrassment. She turned to Harrington, her voice dropping to a growl. Hand over your badge and gun. Now. It wasn't a request, it was an order, and the finality in it hit like a gavel. Harrington froze, his eyes wide, pleading. Sarge, wait, please, he started, but Ramirez shut him down with a look that could have cracked stone. Now, she repeated, her hand outstretched, unwavering. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, his eyes on the ground, like he wanted no part of this wreckage. Harrington's hands shook as he unbuckled his belt, the clink of metal loud in the quiet night. He placed his badge and gun in Ramirez's palm, his movements slow, like he was handing over his life. His face was ash white, his career unraveling in seconds, and Elena watched, not with satisfaction, but with a kind of clarity. This wasn't just about him. It was about every stop, every assumption, every time someone walked away diminished. Ramirez turned to Elena, her expression tight but respectful. Chief Morgan, I'm deeply sorry for this, she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. This isn't how we operate. I'll make sure it's addressed. Elena nodded, but her eyes were steel. I expect a full report, she said, her voice calm but firm, each word a demand that carried beyond this street. Not just on Harrington, but on how your department handles stops like this. Training, oversight, complaints, I want it all. Because this, she gestured to Harrington, now a shadow of himself staring at the pavement. This doesn't happen again. Yes, ma'am, Ramirez said, quick, sincere, her posture straightening like she felt the weight of Elena's authority. You have my word. She glanced at Harrington, her disgust barely masked, then back to Elena. Anything else you need from us tonight? Elena held her gaze, letting the question settle, letting the night breathe. She could have pushed harder, called in her own team, turned this into a federal circus. But she'd made her point. Harrington was done, and Ramirez knew the clock was ticking on her department's accountability. Sometimes the loudest lessons were the quiet ones. Not tonight, Elena said finally, her voice softer but no less commanding. But I'll be watching. She turned back to her car, her steps steady, deliberate, the gravel crunching under her boots like a countdown. Harrington's eyes followed her, hollow like he was seeing his mistake in slow motion. But she didn't look back. The night was hers again, and she wasn't giving it up. The street was still, the red and blue lights flickering like a dying pulse, casting jagged shadows across the pavement. Elena Morgan stood by her car, her silhouette sharp against the squad car's glare, every inch of her radiating a quiet, unshakable command. Officer Harrington was a ghost of himself, his badge and gun gone, handed over to Sergeant Ramirez like relics of a life he'd just lost. His eyes were hollow, fixed on the ground, like he could hide from the weight of what he'd done. Ramirez stood nearby, her face tight with a mix of fury and respect, her promise of a report still ringing in the air. The younger officer lingered back, silent, like he'd rather vanish than witness this reckoning. But Elena wasn't done. Not quite. She stepped forward, her boots deliberate on the gravel, each crunch a reminder that this moment was hers. Her gaze settled on Harrington, not with anger. Anger was too small for this, but with a clarity that cut deeper than any shout. "Officer," she said, her voice low, steady, like a judge closing a case. "You got one chance to hear this, so listen good." Harrington's head jerked up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time since her badge had flipped his world. He looked like a man drowning, grasping for something to hold on to, but Elena's stare offered no lifeline. "You saw me tonight, a black woman in a nice car, and you decided I didn't belong," she said, each word measured, heavy, like stones dropped into still water. "You didn't ask, didn't think, just acted on whatever story you told yourself. That's not a mistake, it's a choice. And choices have consequences." Her words landed hard, and Harrington flinched, his hands twitching like he wanted to argue but knew he'd already lost. The streetlights buzzed faintly overhead, the city's hum creeping back, but it was background noise to the truth unfolding here. Elena leaned in, just a fraction, her voice dropping colder, sharper like a blade finding its mark. "Next time, if you get a next time, think before you act, because you never know who you're dealing with." The warning wasn't just for him, it was for every badge, every assumption, every moment like this that needed to end. Harrington's face crumpled, his shoulders sagging like the fight had drained out of him entirely. He nodded barely, a reflex more than agreement, but Elena didn't need his buy-in. She'd said what mattered, planted a seed he'd carry long after tonight, assuming he ever wore a badge again. She turned to Ramirez, her expression softening just enough to acknowledge the sergeant's accountability. "Make sure that report's thorough," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "I don't want promises, I want change." "Yes, ma'am," Ramirez replied, her voice steady, her eyes meeting Elena's with a nod that carried weight. "It'll be done. You have my word." There was no hesitation, no dodge, just a soldier recognizing a general. The younger officer shifted, his gaze flicking to Harrington, then away, like he was already rewriting his own playbook. Elena gave a small nod, satisfied for now. She could have stayed, pressed harder, called in her team to turn this into a federal spotlight. But she'd made her mark. Harrington's career was ash, Ramirez was on notice, and the department would feel her shadow moving forward. Sometimes justice wasn't loud. It was a ripple that grew into a wave. She opened her car door, the soft creak breaking the tension, and slid inside. Her movements smooth, deliberate, like she was reclaiming the night. Her hand paused on the keys, her eyes catching Harrington one last time through the window. He stood there, alone now, Ramirez and the other officer stepping back to their car, his silhouette small against the flashing lights. He wasn't just a man who'd lost a badge. He was a lesson, etched in real time, for anyone who thought power came without accountability. Elena started the engine, the low rumble filling the silence, and pulled back onto the road, the city's glow welcoming her like an old friend. As she drove, the tension in her shoulders eased, not gone, but lighter, like a weight she'd carried so long it was part of her. The streetlights streaked past, golden and steady, and for the first time tonight, she let herself exhale fully. She'd walked into this moment as nobody, just a woman driving home, and walked out as Elena Morgan, FBI chief, the kind of force that didn't just win fights but change the rules. Harrington would carry tonight like a scar, and the department would feel her eyes on them, long after her taillights faded. The road stretched ahead, open, hers, and she drove into it, unshaken, unbreakable, a queen reclaiming her kingdom.